Thank you very much, Annette, for the kind introduction, and a great pleasure to be with you. It's really exciting times for clinical trials across the world, and certainly across Europe. So 2022 will be a big year with a lot of exciting things happening and really propelling us into a great future. So thanks very much, everyone. I'm going to talk about ICH E6, so good clinical practice, and E8, general considerations on clinical studies and how these have progressed. I was regulatory chair for E8 for quite a long time, although my colleague from the Austrian agency, Andreas Kirisitz, took over that role when the E6 was beginning, and I'm currently regulatory chair for E6. I have to say in the meeting now that thank you for I am a member of the expert working group, clearly, but what I say here are my own thoughts, although I'm confident that many are shared. So the renovation of good clinical practice really is something that's come. The GCP and the general considerations on clinical trials were finished in the mid-90s, and although we did have the addendum to GCP that added words but couldn't change the existing wording, so there was a real need to change. The research world has changed. Evidence generation, digitalization, even more propelled forward now by COVID, innovative trial designs, and many other things, many different ways of participating and connecting across clinical trials. So it really needs to change, and a lot of feedback from stakeholders about that need. So the ICH, following a lot of discussion and feedback from stakeholders, and including a lot from academia across the world, prepared and launched ICH reflection on GCP renovation in 2017 in January, and this was set out as a stepwise process. So we would, sorry, the slides seem to be moving on their own. We would move forward first with the rewrite of ICH E8, and then with the rewrite of E6, good clinical practice. And in the reflection paper, it sets out clear the most important tool for ensuring human subject protection, and now we say participant protection and high quality data, is a well-designed and well-articulated protocol. And I think if you look in our different rules and guidance across the world, the protocol is at the core of the individual clinical trials and really important, and getting that right is extremely important. So ICH E8 is very much focused on that aspect. And then E6 takes us more into the implementation of the trial and operating the trial. So I think there's a bit of delay in the slides moving forward when I use the arrow. So perhaps if I can say next slide, and if one of you can move the slides, that would be, yeah, thank you. So the purpose is to establish a quality continuum through design and conduct. So from E8 to E6, I think this is really important. There are a lot of reflections that perhaps some of the problems we see in clinical trials, not all of them, are caught up by not really thinking through the design well, not getting the design right, and rushing to first patient in with what's really still the penultimate draft protocol rather than the proper thought through product, and that we would get to the objectives better with better design. But also we need a better framework for running the trial because of all the changes that have taken place, and we need to make sure that we're modernized and ready for future medicines. And indeed, these are also the medicines of today as well as the future, and the same goes for trial designs, technologies, and data sources. But we need to see these two as a continuum, and it'll be important for people to read them together because their concepts are hand down from E8 to E6 and are taken forward there. Next slide, please. Good, thank you. So one really important feature of this whole process, as I said, it was driven a lot by stakeholder feedback, especially from academia, but from elsewhere as well. And we should remember that academia run their own trials, but of course are also, they are the clinicians, the investigators across everybody's trials. So really important. We've also had feedback from patients and consumers, but as well from regulators and the more industrial sponsors and people running trials. So really important, but stakeholder engagement with that wider community is a key feature of this process. And it's at two levels. We had a big step at the end of the consultation period on E8 was a workshop in Washington at FDA, where we had patients, representatives from around the world, academic representatives, industry, and regulators all in the room together, plus people online, sharing their views and expectations and aspirations, both for the completion of E8 and the further work on E6. So really, really important event. And that led through then with ICH adopting a stakeholder engagement plan, which you can find on the website for E6. And this is very much a pilot whose success, I think, will drive broader engagement as this moves forward. We've had regional workshops, and obviously with COVID, many online, which actually it is a disadvantage in some of the interpersonal interactions, but on the other hand has meant we've reached out to an enormous community across the world. And we had 2 workshops last April or May, I think it was, where between the 2 and with them in different time zones, I think we had 5,500 people logged in, so and still able to ask questions in the chat and so on. We have regional representatives, so we have 6 representatives from academia from the different regions: Europe, North America, Latin America, Asia, and somewhere else. That's 5 anyway. 6. So they've been selected by their academic communities, and they are working with the expert working group, seeing proposed text, raising issues, and we're able to prepare and actually share track change draft text with them periodically. So it's really opened up the interaction, I think, been very rich, and the expert working group has really developed a strong sense of confidence and usefulness of these interactions. But also stakeholder engagement, and I'll say a bit more of this on future slides, is built into the revised guidelines. So it foresees involvement of patients in study planning, and that's anchored in the principles and stipulates including stakeholders in study planning and design. So again, not only consulting on the way the guidelines are written and their content, but embedding in those the need to engage stakeholders in the design of the clinical trials themselves at an operational level. So next slide, please. So ICH E8, as I said, is the general considerations on clinical trials. So the rewrite, which was finalized and published, reached step 5, well, step 4 for ICH, and then step 5 for Europe in October of 21, has the general principles and chapter on quality by design and critical to quality factors, a section on drug development planning, so it goes through all the steps and phases of drug development, and a section on study design and conduct and the building blocks of that, examples of critical to quality factors, and then an annex of the various study types and expanding to broader study types. It uses the word study, not trial, because it also, although not terribly detailed on that aspect, reaches out to the concepts of real world evidence and observational studies, as well as interventional clinical trials. E6 is focused on interventional clinical trials. Next slide, please. So there are 3 general principles in E8, and very importantly, the protection of clinical study participants, the observation of the Declaration of Helsinki, the need for proper information to ensure that the drug is acceptably safe for the planned study, and the study is a sensible thing to undertake, and that these are reviewed and evaluated as they become available, so data as it becomes available. to ensure that potential implications for study participants are managed and people are protected. And we rely so hugely on people willing to be participant in trials for our health. We only have to look at COVID-19, where I think something in excess of 100,000 people have been willing to put their names forward and be volunteers in vaccine studies. And that has been hugely important for global health. So we owe an enormous gratitude to study participants at all levels in different trials. So very important to recognize that. And really now using the word participant rather than subject is the key, and this will spread across all ICH documents in time. Next slide. Next is about the scientific approach to study design, planning, conduct, analysis, and reporting, and in particular talking about quality, because that then also branches into the GCP, and the quality of a clinical study is considered as fitness for purpose. So the study and the clinical trial for GCP has to be able to fulfill the purpose. And the purpose of clinical studies are to generate reliable information, to answer research questions, and support decision-making while protecting the study participants. So you want to create information to build knowledge and enable decision-making, and that can be by the sponsor, by regulators, by ethics committees, ultimately by regulators for marketing authorization, and finally by the patients and healthcare professionals deciding, don't I use this particular medicine? So really, really important, the purpose of clinical trials, and the quality of the information generated should be sufficient to support good decision-making. And quality by design sets out to ensure that the quality of a study is driven proactively by designing quality into the study protocol and processes, and really focusing much more on that aspect of quality. And this involves the use of prospective multidisciplinary approaches to promote the quality of protocol and process design and clear communication on this. So really important concepts. Patient input into drug development is a third general principle, and this is new. It's really important, and there will be more guidance coming from ICH. There's a reflection paper on patient-focused drug development, and I think much more widely in all our interactions. We really need to reach out to the patients and consumers of medicines and the carers, so that their views are brought into the design process, and consultation with them can ensure that their perspectives are captured, that their views can be valuable throughout drug development, and involving them early increases trust in the studies, can facilitate recruitment and promote adherence, and more broadly trust in the overall clinical trial process. Hugely important to make sure we can continue to run good trials. But they also provide a perspective of living with a condition, which may contribute to the determination of endpoints that are meaningful, selection of appropriate population and duration, acceptable comparators, and all the mechanics of clinical trials that may make it difficult for people to stay the course in the clinical trial because it's maybe not practical. And this can all support the development of drugs better tailored for patients' needs. So really important, and we're really very pleased to see this new principle in E8. Next slide. We'll skip this slide because in fact, it's a repetition of the previous one. So then we get, particularly in the quality by design, to critical to quality factors. And these are factors relevant to ensuring the study quality and should be identified for each study. An emphasis is given to those that stand out as critical. Critical because if their integrity were undermined, and that may be from a data perspective or a process perspective, or indeed from a more ethical perspective, the liability or ethics of decision-making would also be undermined, and therefore the whole purpose of the trial is undermined. We need to determine risks that threaten the integrity of these quality factors, the probability and impact of those risks, and decide whether they can be accepted or should be mitigated. And we have to understand that perfection in every aspect is rarely achievable. or only with use of resource out of proportion to the benefits. So we do need to make sure that our study procedures are proportionate to the risks inherent in the study and the importance of the information collected. And this is a really important concept, allied also with the notion that we should focus on what's really important and not add all sorts of other things to protocols, which then distract from the ability to deliver the essentials. Next slide. So there are 4 elements to this: identifying attributes whose integrity is fundamental to study quality, establishing a culture that supports open dialogue, rewards critical thinking, focus on activities essential to the study, so essential to the reliability and meaningfulness, and consider non-essential activities that you can eliminate, so it's not distracting. Engage stakeholders, I've spoken to that already, but in patients, but also treating physicians, clinical investigators, other people who will be involved. So it's not just from within, but from outside of the sponsor organization to ensure we're building a good trial. And review the critical to quality factors as you start the trial. Knowledge from inside the trial or outside the trial may influence the control measures or the quality factors, so they need to be optimized on a continuous basis. And then we can optimally align research objectives with planning, conduct, and decision-making by promoting flexibility and moving away from a one-size-fits-all strategy. And I think that both in terms of the kind of process and the kind of protocols that we run. There are considerations on identifying these factors, and these build up through the whole sections of the E8. So it's really good to read it from end to end. It's not an enormous document, so well worth going through and understanding how this logic builds up. Next slide. So then we get to E6. So E8, as I said, that was finalized at ICH level and at European level in October, and following through also in the other regions. E6 kicked off in November 2019, and we are working. We had one face-to-face meeting in ICH, and the rest has been, how can I say, virtual, obviously, but it has made and is making good progress. So we are rewriting GCP. The original was finalized in '96, as I've said. The addendum in 2016 already encouraged implementation of improved and more efficient GCP approaches, updated electronic record standards, but couldn't change the existing wording. So it was a compromise to move quickly, but enabling us to move forward. Go click, and again, thank you. So the approach is to have overarching principles, which were published in draft form during last year. So people can already see the direction of travel. They will be published for public consultation with Annex 1 later this year. Annex 1 then is the real rewrite of the existing GCP, and that will go to public consultation with the overarching principles. And when those are finalized, that replaces the existing GCP. And then we have Annex 2, which is considerations for non-traditional interventional trials, decentralized trials, other kinds of trials. It doesn't mean that they can't happen now or under Annex 1, but it will help to have additional considerations, and we'll kick off that work as soon as the Annex 1 and general overarching principles go to public consultation, so in the second half of this year. Next slide. Annex 1 is there for the interventional, but it's all interventional clinical trials, but Annex 1 is the core rewrite of the existing GCP along with the overarching principles. And then, as I say, Annex 2 to look at other kinds of trials and decentralized or additional considerations for these. Next slide. This is the time frame I've set out. So as I say, we kicked off in November 2019. The principles we have published as a transparency measure in May of last year. They may get some further tweaking, if I can call it that, as we prepare Annex 1, and the 2 will go to public consultation. My guess at the moment is probably around end of the summer of this year, so in the third quarter. And then we'll kick off the work on Annex 2, whilst the public are commenting on the principles in Annex 1. Then we'll finalize those and get them to finalization, and in parallel, Annex 2 will be consulted, and that will go to finalization at a later stage. But principles in Annex 1 replacing the existing GCP is the key thought. So do read the principles that are already out there. So the vision is that GCP should be flexible to allow for and encourage innovation, protect participants, and underpin the reliability of results, help focus resource and efforts on what matters most. These are the critical to quality factors, and focus on the intent and goals of GCP, but recognize that there are many ways of achieving these, and perhaps not be prescriptive on the process to achieve them. We need comprehensive principles that remain relevant as technology and designs evolve, especially leveraging and facilitating the digital ecosystem. And then we've driven through a lot of experience now in the last 2 years, which will really help this as well. And thoughtful processes about trial conception, design, conduct. What kind of processes do you put in place? And there are alternative ways of achieving the same ends, and people should be able to use those. So the principles now, these are the key headings. You've got the link there, it's on the ICH website, and we can see just the headings. There's more detail in the principles themselves, but clearly embedding, as always, in the ethical principles of the Declaration of Helsinki, ensuring the rights and well-being of trial participants. Informed consent is a key process, review by ethics committees, and the need for the trials to be scientifically sound and based on robust current knowledge and approaches. Next slide. Trials should be well designed and conducted by qualified individuals. Quality should be built into the science and operational design and conduct. Trial processes, and this is important, and measures and approaches should be proportionate to the risk to participants and to the reliability of trial results. Clear, concise, feasible protocols generate reliable results, clear responsibilities, and investigational products generated according to GMP and used, handled, etc. in the same way. So on the next few slides, I've just highlighted some quotes from those principles, but I'm not going to go through them in detail, but just to point out that innovative digital health technologies, expanding the approaches to trial conduct, using variety of data sources, including healthcare infrastructure, designs that bring the trial to participants. So you can imagine decentralized trials or hybrid approaches with decentralized elements. Involving the stakeholders we've talked about. Principles are flexible and applicable to a broad range of trials, proportionate to the risks inherent in the trial and the data collected, minimize unnecessary complexity. So these are all reflect the philosophy which has been very much addressing the concerns of stakeholders. Representative participant selection, qualification of physicians, but also those involved in the practical interactions should be appropriately qualified, but for the particular role they undertake, enabling the use of different media technology to inform participants and obtain consent. So you can see permeating these, next slide again, the theme of digitalization, of opening up to wider populations and groups of people, being proportionate, but assuring reliability are all key elements of the approach. And the risks that we're looking to manage for the participants are those beyond the standard of medical care. Obviously, standard medical care has its own process for care and risk management, but when we do a trial, we may add certain risks, which may be large in some trials and smaller in others. Relative to standard medical care, so we need to be particularly mindful of that aspect. Next, please. And then operational feasibility, clear, concise, transparency also emphasized, and registration on publicly accessible and recognized databases, and already that's been in the chat. So the stakeholder input then that we were really driven by had high-level features and risk-based approach, proportionality, fit for purpose. Well, we've got that in E8 and in the principles. Let's make sure we translate that into the detail and the practice. Minimize over-interpretation. There's a wide view that things are over-interpreted, whether it's, for instance, that the information sheets to patients are now, sometimes 30, 40 pages long, which is, it's not an appropriate way of informing patients. We get a lot of pushback from patients groups themselves that, for instance, individual communicating of CSRs or SAEs without context or explanation to every investigator isn't necessarily helpful. So we're trying to address these aspects as we write both the principles and the detail. Obviously, technology enabling that, getting input from investigators and academic research institutions. We're really reaching out to them, engaging participants. Importance of doing adequate clinical trials, avoiding waste of resource or time of participants with poor design or underpowering of studies. We've seen really highlighted in the COVID era as well, that a lot of trials that are too small, not well designed, consuming a lot of resource without delivering actionable results. So really important, excuse me. So we want to facilitate objective-centered, flexible approach to clinical studies, quality by design, stakeholder engagement, both in the preparation of the guidance, but also in the design of individual studies and their processes, enable a broad range of designs, and these will continue to expand. There are lots of discussions on platform trials, for instance, at the moment, decentralized trials with external control groups, all sorts of things out there which are evolving. So we can't anticipate all of them, but try and have guidance that enables good research. Upfront assessment of risks so that the risks to the key critical to quality factors are managed, whether it's in the study design or in the procedures, and proportionate management of these with controls focusing on the critical elements and really supporting the use of technology and making sure it's well used. A lot of this is not new, we can say, or it's happening, and getting new thinking and new approaches really requires a lot of change management. It's one thing to write what we write in guidance, but actually enabling that and making sure that new, good, different approaches to research can take place, that we get better designed, larger trials where trials need to be large, and that these are really focusing on what they need to achieve, and making sure that the people within them can trust the trial process and be well cared for in participating. So change management will be a big aspect, because, for instance, I commented on minimizing over-interpretation. Well, there's only so much you can do in writing guidance to achieve that. It's also about changing mindsets, and that's right across all of us, regulators, sponsors, stakeholders, investigators. So everyone involved in the conduct of trials should read and understand these guidelines, change the way we all work. It's not just cumulatively adding more and more to the status quo. We really have to revisit the way we work. So change management is the greatest challenge. It's adjusting behaviors and attitudes away from preconceived ideas and interests and onto a better way of working. And I think as was said earlier, 2022 will be a big year for clinical trials, as will 23 and 24. We really need to drive this through. And I've just two quotes which I use often, and I think they capture very well what we want to do. So from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and he was pilot, admiring his aircraft wings when he wrote this: perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. So you have the pure essential, which is what gives beauty to good engineering, aircraft wings, bridges, etc. But also from Einstein, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So if we put the two together, I think they're good principles to drive us forward. I think that's my last slide. Yes, next steps. So we're working on the revision now. We're going through the structure and content. We're particularly looking, in fact, at the monitoring, safety reporting, the sponsor and investigator parts, and also looking at having a section on data governance because of all this digital world that we didn't have before. We'll refine the principles probably before we go to public consultation, continue the engagement with stakeholders. We're meeting in a couple of weeks with them, with the academia, and hopefully get that public consultation on the principles and Annex 1. Well, not more than hopefully, I'm sure it will happen in 2022. And my guess, as I say, is third quarter. So with the fingers crossed for September. And then we'll start on the Annex 2. Thank you.